2 months after a damning report into substandard care at a maternity unit, inspectors find that chaotic conditions remain. Chronic staff shortages and a risk of babies being misidentified are found at East Kent Hospitals Trust.
I had spent days asking them to help me. I wasn't helped, and then I ended up with no baby. And because I was so unwell, I had to stay in for 2 nights on a ward.
Also this lunchtime, after higher than expected inflation figures, lenders put up the rates on new mortgage deals. Period poverty, the terrible cost of not being able to afford sanitary products. And I found a love for me. Ed Sheeran comes to band practice, the young musicians and their perfect surprise.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Geraint Vincent.
Good afternoon. Not enough staff, poorly maintained equipment and terrible hygiene. The standard of care for newborn babies and their mothers was so poor in the East Kent Hospitals Trust, inspectors nearly shut down one maternity unit earlier this year. The Trust has apologised again and promised immediate improvements, but this was already a trust under the spotlight. An independent inquiry last year found that 45 babies who died in its care since 2009 would have lived if they'd been looked after properly. Here's Sharon Thomas.
Tanya Linehan lost her baby son, Ashton, in 2012. He was stillborn.
It's the worst experience you can imagine, to go all that time. You have absolutely everything ready, everyone's expectations. There was people that you encounter, you're not necessarily close friends with them, they're neighbours, they're people that see you in the supermarket and they say, "Where's the baby?" And you have to go through it over and over.
Ashton was one of 45 babies who could have lived if they'd received adequate maternity care at East Kent Hospitals Trust between 2009 and 2020.
I had spent days asking them to help me. I wasn't helped, and then I ended up with no baby. And because I was so unwell, I had to stay in for 2 nights on a ward. I nearly lost my own life.
According to an independent review 3 months before this latest report. Following that review, inspectors from Hospitals Watchdog, the Care Quality Commission, visited the William Harvey Hospital in Ashford unannounced in January and rated it inadequate. It's now emerged they considered closing the maternity unit after citing a further decline in the quality as extremely disappointing on finding bloodstains on the toilets. That staff didn't always wash their hands or use aprons and gloves whilst delivering care, that life-saving equipment was not available in the right place, nor was it cleaned and checked, and that hospital staff didn't always get a second opinion. Inspectors told the Trust to make immediate improvements or face enforcement action to ensure patients were protected. The Trust has apologised and admits there is still room for improvement, saying, "We recognise that despite the changes that have been made to the service so far, there is a lot more to do to ensure we're consistently providing high standards of care for every family, every time." For bereaved parents like Tanya, knowing her child could have lived is almost too much to bear.
The case is we would have a healthy baby and a very different outcome. The way that we've suffered since, our mental health, our relationships, it's all as a consequence of what we went through unnecessarily.
Sharon Thomas, ITV News.
Now, if you're about to renew your mortgage, then I'm afraid there's some unwelcome news this lunchtime. The biggest lender in the country, Nationwide, have raised their rates by 0.45%. The latest core inflation figures remain stubbornly high, and there are expectations other lenders could follow Nationwide's lead. Carl Dinnan explains.
The effects of this week's higher than expected inflation figures are now working their way through to the mortgage market. With interest rates the main tool for putting the brakes on inflation, markets now predict the Bank of England may raise its rate from 4.5% to as much as 5.5%. The question is how much mortgage lenders anticipate that rise.
I think we're getting an initial surge of banks putting up their fixed rates and their variable rates over the next few days. However, the evidence we saw back with the fiscal event in the autumn from Liz Truss was you get that initial wave of changes to mortgage rates, and then it eases off as competition kicks in.
But no one can depend on rates settling down, with inflation proving harder than expected to rein in. And buyers like Zayan are already struggling with the cost of living.
I did actually have a decent deposit saved at one point, but to be honest, with everything I'm having to pay out, I'm having to dip into my savings to, live my everyday life at the minute. So yeah, it's definitely a struggle.
Current homeowners are also being hit in the pocket already.
Anywhere you go across the UK, the number one issue is always the cost of living. People saying, I can't afford to pay my bills. Mortgages are a big part of that. They were high enough. They took a massive whack last autumn with Liz Truss, who put a Tory premium on our mortgages. And even now, people are paying far too much on their mortgages.
Today, the Chancellor said controlling inflation was so important that he was comfortable with interest rates rising, even if that causes a recession. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
An 11-year-old boy is in a critical condition after being hit by a police car in Lancaster. The collision happened last night at around 8:30 when Lancashire police were responding to an emergency call. Well, our reporter Mel Barham is at the scene for us. Mel, what's the latest you have there?
Well, there's really not much left here at the scene to show what happened here last night, except for a sign and a traffic cone where a traffic light used to stand. This is a very busy main road into Lancaster, right next to a children's play park, and it was just before 8:30 last night that an 11-year-old boy and a friend were crossing at this junction when one of them was hit by a police car. Now, we understand that police car, which was marked, had its lights and its sirens on at the time and was responding to a police call. The boy was taken to hospital in a critical condition. I've spoken to one lady this morning who said there was a lot of anger directed towards the police here last night. She also said it took about 15 to 20 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. Well, this incident has now been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC. In a statement, Lancashire Police say our thoughts are with the child's loved ones at this time. An investigation is underway to establish the full circumstances that led to the collision. That investigation is now in its very early stages, and we understand that the 11-year-old boy is still in a critical condition in hospital this lunchtime.
OK, Mel, many thanks. Now, British Cycling have banned trans women from competing in female events. They follow British Swimming and World Athletics, who've made similar rulings. Well, our sports editor, Steve Scott, has been following this. Steve, this is going to be another controversial decision, isn't it?
I think so, Geraint. It's a motive issue. Many sports are grappling with at the moment. British Cycling, as you've just said, just the latest to review its policy and change it. The new policy means trans women athletes will not be allowed to race in competitive women's races. They will have to compete in a new open category, which actually replaces the old men's category. British Cycling say that their change of policy has come by consulting the wider cycling family and also reviewing the current medical evidence, although they do admit that that evidence is not extensive, but it's all relating, they say, to fair competition. Here's their chief executive, John Dutton, who I spoke to.
The competitive policy is predicated on the basis of fairness, and that's been the overriding determining factor in getting to this point. The non-competitive policy, and it's important for us to have two, recognises inclusivity and welcoming all athletes. So we have taken all of that, the research, the consultation, listening, and it has taken some time to get to this point, and that shows the complexity of the subject matter.
Now, of course, Geraint, this means that Britain's most high-profile trans woman cyclist, Emily Bridges, her hopes of competing in women's races are effectively over. She's one of 10 cyclists who this new ruling affects. She's been scathing about their decision, describing it as a violent act. She went on to say, research isn't being reviewed critically or any discussion about the relevance of the data to specific sports. Any discussion is inherently political and driven by bad faith actors. Well, the policies will be introduced sometime later this year, and British Cycling have committed to review it should any new evidence emerge in the meantime.
OK, Steve, many thanks. 11 people have been arrested following the attempted murder of a senior detective in Northern Ireland. DCI John Caldwell was shot multiple times at a sports complex in Omagh in County Tyrone in February. The shooting was linked to dissident Republicans. This morning, 9 men and 2 women, aged between 21 and 72, were arrested by police investigating the attack. Well, Eden Wilson joins us live from Belfast. Eden, tell us more.
Yes, good afternoon. Police have described those 11 arrests as a significant development in their investigation. It now brings the total number of arrests to 28, but what they have told us is that a quarter of those are actually re-arrests. Also today, the PSNI has released CCTV footage as well as 2 photographs of what they believe are the cars involved in the gunmen involved on the night of the shooting, as well as the night before. They're hopeful someone will be able to identify those potentially in the car or indeed the car themselves. Now, to give you a little context into the shooting, DCI Caldwell was coaching young children in a local sports complex in Omagh the night of the attempted murder. He was off duty, and as he returned to the boot of his car to return the balls, gunmen appeared and began shooting while his young son watched on. He was in hospital for a number of weeks, but he is up and about now. Actually, a couple of days ago, John Caldwell was spotted at a garden party hosted by the King and Queen at Hillsborough, their royal residence here in Northern Ireland. So while police are obviously relieved he is doing well, their focus is absolutely on this investigation and getting those charged behind it and in court.
Eden, many thanks. Next, to a consequence of the cost of living crisis that is rarely spoken about, period poverty. That is the growing number of women who can't afford to manage their menstruation safely or effectively. The report found that 21% of women and people who menstruate in the UK struggle to buy enough period products, up from 12% in 2022. Of these, 60% had to prioritise buying food. And 37% used tissues or cotton wool instead of sanitary products, while others resorted to using socks or newspaper. And 41% of respondents said they kept their pads or tampons in longer, with 8% reusing them. Well, with me here is Natasha Burgess from ActionAid, who's the charity who commissioned this research. Just tell me a bit more, Natasha, about the research itself. Where were the people and the women that you talked to? Was it just in the UK? Or?
So, yeah, actually, if it's OK, I'd like to start by thanking you for getting us on, because right now, 300 million women across the world, including myself, are having their periods. And we don't talk about this anywhere as near as much as we should, right? This polling was UK. OK, so this was women and people who menstruate. But obviously, ActionAid is an international charity.
That's why I asked, OK.
Yeah. So I think what we found interesting and desperately sad is that the impact of the cost of living crisis is one that has meant that the number of women and people who menstruate who are struggling to afford sanitary products in the UK has doubled in the past 12 months alone, right? So we often talk about the cost of living crisis in terms of heating or eating, but not in terms of bleeding, right? And how we cover that. So women, as you have discussed, are improvising. They're being very resourceful, but that's dangerous. That's dangerous, right? Toxic shock syndrome, infections, which in worst case scenarios can lead to infertility. Cost of living crisis is not a situation that sits alone in the UK. This is worldwide. So, for example, if we look at somewhere like Uganda, because of the impact of the COVID pandemic, there has been a depletion in sanitary resources while the government and schools and families prioritise staple foods and things like that.
You talked about the health effects. I mean, there's kind of social consequences as well, because, you know, I'm thinking here of people at schoolgirls who, you know, if they get their period, they can't get hands on the right products, they might not go to school, or indeed women who won't go to work. I mean, it has consequences across people's lifestyles, doesn't it?
You're spot on, right? And if we look at, for example, Uganda, right, there is a camp for displaced people. And there's a wonderful young woman called Razia. She is a feminist activist who goes into that camp and she shows young women and girls how to make sanitary products that are reusable. She reported back to ActionAid in Ghana that the majority of girls actually use dried cow dung and they fashion it into sanitary pads.
Me.
Yeah, right? And they use that. And this is because they are smart, they are resourceful, but clearly that is enormously dangerous.
Very quickly, we have about 30 seconds left. What can be done in this country, do you think, to make it easier for people?
In this country, around the world, to me, humanity is a global thing, right? Our humanitarian response. So let's look at providing for women in this country and women and girls across the world. You can do that. Go to our website, have a look at Share a Better Period. £3 will buy a sanitary pack for someone. £7 will buy an education piece in how to make pads. £10 will buy the time of a nurse to teach women and girls about their bodies.
Great job.
Boom.
Good to see you, Natasha. Thanks for coming in. Over 170 people who say their babies were affected by hormone pregnancy test drugs like Primados have had their legal challenge brought to an end by a High Court judge. The claimants have been campaigning for compensation from a number of pharmaceutical companies and the government. The drugs were given to women to test if they were pregnant from the 1950s until the late 1970s. They are alleged to have been responsible for serious birth defects. And UK retail sales have grown more than they were expected to in April. Retailers saw a rise of 0.5% compared to predictions of just 0.3%. It's bounced back from a fall of 1.2% in March. Sales were boosted by people buying jewellery, sportswear and shopping at department stores. Now, the former rugby league star Kevin Sinfield has raised millions for motor neurone disease charities since his friend and Leeds Rhinos teammate Rob Burrow was diagnosed with the condition. He's raised the bar too for friendship along the way. This week's Kevin's memoirs came out. His passion to help Rob, though, is as strong as ever. Barbara Holmes reports.
The marathon was built on friendship and running for a mate with a mate. It was a really tough course, as everyone will tell you, and the heat was beaming down. He did fantastic and showed what a true warrior is. It was a special moment. It was a moment I'll cherish. It was a great symbol for the marathon. If anybody ever wondered what the Rob Burrow Leeds Marathon were about, then I think that picture tells that it was about friendship and love and looking after your mate and being there for each other.
Kevin Sinfield has gone above and beyond to be there for his friend Rob Burrow in the 4 years since his devastating motor neuron disease diagnosis. Along with getting his former teammate to the finish line of the Rob Burrow Leeds Marathon earlier this month, Kevin has undertaken a series of gruelling challenges which have raised nearly £5 million for motor neuron disease charities. The former Leeds Rhinos' latest endeavour has been a little more sedentary. He's penned a memoir called The Extra Mile.
I never wanted to write a book. Never. I've been a captain for 13 years there. I've spent my whole time trying to keep things that happen in the dressing room quiet, not talk about them. So it had to be something different. In horrific circumstances, you end up finding yourself being passionate about something I never thought I'd be passionate about.
And despite having run hundreds of miles, that passion hasn't abated. Kevin is determined to keep going by any means possible.
I can't believe that we allow people to have to face this like we have done. I can't get my head around how horrific the journey is. I will always be passionate about this. I will always try and fundraise and support whatever I can. My legs are ready and will always be ready, and when I can't run anymore, then I find something else. Find another challenge, find something else I can do that helps.
Barbara Holmes reporting there. Finally, this lunchtime, it was just a regular after-school rehearsal for students in the big band at Middleton High School in Florida. That was until Ed Sheeran showed up and joined in. The singer, who's currently on tour in the United States, is well known for his pop-up sing-alongs. But that wasn't the only surprise he had for them, as Charlie Frost reports.
He may be on a back-to-back North America tour, but Ed Sheeran couldn't miss big band practice at this high school in Florida. Though so caught up in the music, it took these students a moment to realise they had a star in their presence. And the surprises didn't stop there.
I've also brought some guitars to give to you guys for the music department. And, I'm playing a sold-out stadium tomorrow, but I've got tickets for all of you guys to come.
Sheeran's no stranger to a surprise serenade. Earlier this month, a blue Volvo was his supporting act as he entertained fans in a street in New York. And from the streets of the Big Apple to the subway, platform performer Mike Young got a shock when Ed joined him for a duet in 80.
I don't know what else that I can do. I keep dancing with my
And after hearing this, from the cue for his London concert at the beginning of the year, he got Luke up on stage.
Do you want to come up and sing the A-Team? Everyone say hi to Luke.
And they say she's in the class A-Team.
But this isn't a new habit for the pop star. In 2015, he gave this schoolgirl something to sing about when he joined her in the mall for a rendition of Evergreen. Sheeran's latest surprise sing-along brought smiles and tears, a band practice to remember for these budding musicians. Charlie Frost, ITV News.
And that is it this lunchtime. The latest Where You Are is next. Gamal is here with the evening news at 6:30, but from everyone on the Lunchtime team, bye-bye. Enjoy your afternoon.